#Galactic Council stunned. Is this really a human army or something worse? The chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest constructed space in known history. It floated at the center of the Velhari Nebula, anchored by 7 gravitational pylons and lit by the slow burn of 3 dying stars. 42 species had sent their representatives here. 42 flags, 42 tongues, 42 sets of eyes, and every single one of them was watching the empty seat at the far end of the great curved table. The human seat. Counselor Drax of the Velshoran pressed all 4 of his hands together and exhaled slowly through his gill slits. He was the oldest member of the council by 2 centuries, and he had never once seen the human seat occupied. Humanity had been a registered species for 11 years. In that time, they had sent a single written reply to every formal summons. It always said the same thing. We are aware of the meeting. We will attend when we are ready. They had never been ready. Until today. The message that had arrived 3 days ago was different. It did not carry the usual polite dismissal. It was short, direct, and carried an authentication code that the council's own cryptographers had spent 40 hours trying to break before giving up and declaring it genuine. We are coming. Clear the docking corridor. All of it. Drax had read that last line 6 times. All of it. The main docking corridor of the council station was 40 kilometers long and wide enough to berth 200 mid-class warships side by side. No single delegation had ever needed more than a fraction of it. The Kethvoran Empire, the most militarized species in the council, brought 12 ships to formal sessions. The Suluan Collective brought 9. Even during the height of the governance wars, no delegation had filled more than a tenth of that corridor. The humans had asked for all of it. Ambassador Lena Marsh sat in the small human advance shuttle and watched the council station grow on the forward screen. She was not military. She was a diplomat, 38 years old, born in the city of Denver on a blue-green world that most of the galaxy had never bothered to take seriously. She wore a gray jacket and carried a single leather folder under her arm. She looked, by any measure, completely unremarkable. That was intentional. Beside her, Colonel Derek Vaughn stood with his arms crossed and his eyes on the same screen. He was tall, quiet, and had a face that gave away nothing. He had spent 22 years in the United Earth Defense Corps before moving into strategic coordination, and he had a habit of watching things very carefully before he said anything about them. They're going to panic, Lena said. Good, Derek replied. The shuttle docked at the advanced terminal, and the 2 of them walked through the airlock without ceremony. A delegation of 6 council representatives met them in the corridor. They were from different species, a tall Velshoran, 2 Suluan, a Kethvoran in full diplomatic armor, and 2 smaller beings from races Lena recognized but had never personally dealt with. They all had one thing in common. They looked nervous. The Velshoran spoke first. His translator rendered his words in flat, precise standard. Ambassador Marsh. The council welcomes the human delegation. We note that your fleet has not yet arrived in sensor range. We expected. They're already here, Lena said. The Velshoran's gill slits flared. I'm sorry. They arrived 6 hours ago, Derek said. They've been holding position just outside your long-range sensor grid. Standard protocol. We don't move our assets into a new space until the diplomatic lead confirms the environment. There was a pause. A long one. You have assets positioned outside our sensor range, the Kethvoran said. His voice was deep and carried the particular flatness of a species that had not needed to show fear in a very long time. How many ships? Derek looked at him for a moment. Enough. Lena set her folder on the small table beside the airlock door and folded her hands in front of her. We were told this was an emergency session. Something about a formal review of human territorial expansion and a request for compliance documentation. Is that correct? The representatives exchanged glances. The Velshoran found his composure first. That is one way to characterize it. The Council has concerns about humanity's development pace. Your species has colonized 47 systems in 11 years without filing standard Council expansion reports. There are questions about your military build. There are questions about your industrial output. There are questions, Lena said. Yes. Then we are here to answer them. She picked up her folder and tucked it back under her arm. But I want to be clear about something before we walk into the chamber. We came to this meeting in good faith. We answered the summons. We brought our documentation and our people and our full delegation. She paused. We also brought everything else. That was your choice, not ours. You asked us to show up. We showed up. The Kethvoran took one slow step forward. He was nearly 2.5 meters tall, and his armor made him look even larger. Ambassador. I want to be direct with you. The Council has reviewed what little data we have on your military development. Some members believe the numbers are fabricated. Others believe they are real, and they are frightened. I am neither. I am curious. Your people have been quiet for 11 years. Quiet in a way no rising species has ever managed to be. We have fought wars. We have expanded. We have built and lost and rebuilt empires. And during all of that, humanity has been sitting in its little corner of the galaxy doing something. He tilted his massive head. What have you been doing? Lena smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that did not reach her eyes. Building, she said. Building what? She started walking toward the council chamber. Derek fell into step beside her. The 6 representatives scrambled to follow, which was not the order of things they were used to. You'll see, she said. 3 hours later, the signal came through on every screen in the council station simultaneously. It was not a broadcast. It was not a hail. It was simply a change in the sensor readings, a massive, sudden, coordinated change, as 460 human ships dropped out of silent running and appeared on every tracking display at once. They had been there the whole time. The council chamber went completely silent. Drax stared at the sensor map. The human fleet did not form a battle line. It did not form a standard defensive arc. It formed something no one in the room had a name for, a geometry that suggested neither aggression nor fear, but something far more unsettling than either. Preparation. That, said one of the junior Soluan representatives in a very small voice, is not a diplomatic escort. No one disagreed, the sensor room of the council station was not supposed to be accessible during formal sessions. It was a technical space, full of equipment and junior staff, not a place for senior representatives. But within minutes of the human fleet materializing on every display in the building, no fewer than 19 senior delegates had crowded into the room and were staring at the screens with expressions that ranged from disbelief to something approaching genuine fear. Drax stood at the center of the room. He had been in this position before, not in this room, but in this moment. The moment when numbers stopped being numbers and started being a fact that had to be lived with. He had felt it during the Kethvoran expansion of the last century. He had felt it when the Soluan Collective had first deployed their gravity pulse fleet. He was feeling it now, and it was worse than either of those times, because at least with the Kethvoran and the Soluan, he had known they were building. He had not known about this. Run the count again, he said. The young technician at the primary console, a Velshoran barely out of her training cycle, ran the count again. Her hands were not steady. 463 confirmed vessels, Counselor. The count keeps adjusting because some of the smaller units are in close formation and our resolution, she stopped. Swallowed. Our resolution cannot separate them cleanly at this range. Meaning the number could be higher. Yes, Counselor. Drax folded all 4 of his hands together and said nothing. In the council chamber, Lena Marsh had returned to her seat, the human seat, occupied for the first time in 11 years, and was calmly reviewing documents from her folder. She did not look at the screens. She did not need to. Derek stood a few paces behind her, hands behind his back, expression unchanged. The Kethvoran first speaker, a being named Gorath, had not sat down since the fleet appeared. He stood at his place at the great table and stared at the sensor projection floating above the center of the chamber. His species had the best military intelligence network in the council. They had files on every known power in the galaxy. They had analysts who spent their entire careers tracking the buildup and decay of other species' forces. They had almost nothing on humanity. A handful of satellite images. Some intercepted trade manifests. A few reports from border patrols that had spotted human vessels and noted their unusual designs. The reports had called the ships compact and heavily reinforced, which in Kethvoran naval terminology was usually a polite way of saying unsophisticated. The analysts had used the word primitive in more than one summary. Gorath was now looking at 463 ships that were nothing close to primitive. "Ambassador," he said. His voice was very controlled. "I want to understand something." Lena looked up from her folder. "Of course. Those vessels. The large ones, the ones our system is classifying as primary combatants. They are not in any format we recognize. The whole geometry is unlike anything in our database. The drive signatures are unfamiliar. The weapons arrays," he stopped. "Our analysts believe your ships are carrying weapons arrays, but they cannot identify the type or yield. Can you explain this?" "We built them ourselves," Lena said. "I understand that. I am asking about the technology." "So are we," she replied pleasantly. "That's the honest answer. Some of it we developed. Some of it we found, adapted, and improved. Human engineers have a particular habit of looking at someone else's design and deciding they can do it better. We usually can." She tilted her head slightly. "You're welcome to ask our technical team for a briefing. They're very proud of their work." Gorith studied her for a long moment. "You are not frightened of us?" "No. You were invited here to answer for unauthorized expansion. To submit documentation. To explain your development to this council." He spread his arms slightly, a gesture that in Kethvoran body language indicated the presentation of an overwhelming case. "And yet you sit there as if this were a casual meeting." "It is a casual meeting," Lena said. "At least from our side." The chamber fell quiet again. Outside, in the docking corridor that the humans had asked to be cleared, a second development was occurring that nobody had reported to the chamber yet. The advance shuttle that had brought Lena and Derek was still docked at the forward terminal. But now, moving with calm efficiency through the corridor's secondary access ports, human personnel were coming aboard the station in organized groups. Not soldiers. Not armed security in battle dress. Something harder to categorize. They wore dark gray uniforms with no decorations. They carried equipment cases. They moved in groups of 6 and they did not hurry, and they did not speak loudly, and every single one of them had the same quality that Derek had, a quality that the station's security staff, watching on cameras, kept trying to name and failing to. It was not aggression. It was not arrogance. It was something quieter and more durable than either of those things. It was the look of people who had already decided what they would do if things went wrong, and were simply waiting to see if that would be necessary. The station's head of security, a Soluan named Ventharuk, watched the camera feeds from his post and sent an urgent message to the council floor. He classified it as a priority alert, which meant it would interrupt the session. The response he received from the chamber was a terse single line from Deputy Councillor Yeth: "We are aware. Do not interfere." Ventharuk read that line 3 times. Then he looked at the feeds again. The human groups were setting up their equipment cases in the corridor's secondary bays. They were not opening them. They were simply placing them, quietly and precisely, in a pattern that his tactical training told him was not random. He sent a second message. This one he classified as maximum priority. It went unanswered. Back in the chamber, a junior delegate from the Myral Confederation, a small, rarely heard from species with 2 delegates and a history of voting with whatever power seemed largest at the time, raised a delicate hand. "Ambassador Marsh. My delegation has a question. A basic one." "Go ahead," Lena said. "Why are you here?" "Not in a political sense. In a practical sense. Your species has ignored this council for 11 years. You have expanded without reporting to us. You have built what appears to be a significant military force without informing us. You have done all of this quietly. So why come now? What do you want?" Lena closed her folder. She set it flat on the table in front of her and rested both hands on top of it. She looked at the Myral delegate for a moment, then slowly looked around the entire chamber, at every face, every set of eyes, every delegate who had been staring at the sensor projection or at her or at Derek since the fleet appeared. "We want the same thing we have always wanted," she said. "To be left alone to do what we do. We came today because you asked. And because we thought it was time you understood exactly who you were asking." She let that sit for a moment. "The fleet outside is not our whole fleet," she said. "It is the portion we were comfortable bringing to a diplomatic meeting." Someone in the chamber made a sound that was not quite a word. Gorith said nothing. Drax, who had just returned from the sensor room, stood in the doorway and looked at the human woman sitting alone at the far end of the great curved table, and felt something he had not felt since the First Kethvoran War. He felt very, very small. The recess was supposed to last 30 minutes. It lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes, and it was not restful for anyone except the two humans. Lena used the time to eat a small meal she had brought from the shuttle. Derek stood by the chamber window and watched the stars. They did not consult with each other very much. They had prepared for this for a long time, and preparation, when done correctly, meant that there was not much left to discuss at the moment of execution. You either knew your ground or you did not. They knew their ground. Outside the chamber, in the private meeting rooms that branched off the main corridor, the council was tearing itself apart. Not loudly. Not with open argument. The Galactic Council rarely did anything openly. It was an institution built on whisper networks and careful implication, and even in crisis it functioned that way. But the whisper networks were running very hot, and the implications being passed back and forth were sharp enough to cut. The Kethvoran bloc was meeting privately with the Soluan. This was notable. The two powers had not held a private bilateral since the border arbitration 12 years ago, and that meeting had been famously cold. Now their representatives were in the same room with the door locked, and the guards posted outside were standing at attention in a way that suggested the conversation inside was not going well. The smaller species, the Myral, the then Sora, the half-dozen others who filled out the council's membership with their careful votes and cautious speeches, were mostly standing in clusters in the corridors, speaking quietly and casting looks at the sensor displays mounted on the walls. The displays still showed the human fleet. It had not moved. It had not changed formation. It sat at the edge of the council station's operational zone with the patience of something that had learned patience through long practice. Councillor Drax found Deputy Councillor Yeth in the small garden room near the back of the station, which was where Yeth always went when she needed to think. She was a Velshoran of middle age, lean and precise, and she was standing in front of the room's single large viewport looking at a patch of stars that did not contain any human ships. They came prepared, Yeth said, without turning around. Yes, Drax said. The fleet. The personnel on the station. The advanced positioning. All of it. She paused. Someone planned this in significant detail. Someone on the human side has been thinking about this meeting for a long time. Possibly years. That would be consistent with everything else we know about them, Drax said. He moved to stand beside her. Or rather, with everything we failed to know about them. Yeth turned to look at him. How badly did we miscalculate? Drax was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet. I'm not sure we have enough information to answer that question. What I do know is that the fleet outside is not the worst part. What is the worst part? The way they behave, Drax said. Look at the ambassador. Look at the colonel. They are not nervous. They have not made a single aggressive gesture. They have not made a single threat. They have simply sat in the chamber and answered questions, and every answer they give makes us more afraid, and they know it, and it does not concern them at all. He paused. A species that has learned to be frightening without trying to frighten you is much more dangerous than one that is simply powerful. Yeth said nothing for a long time. Then, what do? We go back in there, Drax said. And we listen. The session reconvened. The chamber felt different when everyone returned, heavier, somehow, with a shift in the air that had nothing to do with the ventilation. The delegates took their seats with less shuffling and less conversation than usual. Goreth sat down for the first time since the fleet had appeared. Even that small change seemed significant. Lena folded her hands on the table and waited. It was Goreth who spoke. Ambassador. During the recess, my analysts attempted to complete a full assessment of the fleet in sensor range. I want to share some of their findings with you and ask for your confirmation. Go ahead, Lena said. The primary combatant class vessels number 112. Each one carries drive signatures consistent with what we believe to be a multi-stage acceleration system. Our analysts estimate combat velocity at approximately 40% above the fastest ships currently in Council inventory. He read from a small display in front of him. The medium support vessels, we count 190, appear to carry both weapons loadouts and extensive internal infrastructure. Our analysts believe they may function as mobile production platforms. Correct, Lena said. A ripple moved through the chamber. Goreth continued reading. The remaining vessels in the fleet are smaller and faster. Our analysts cannot determine their function with confidence. The whole configuration suggests they are not standard fighter-class craft. They are too large and too heavily reinforced for that role. But they are also not designed for any support function we recognize. He looked up from the display. What are they? Lena looked at Derek. Derek unclasped his hands from behind his back, pulled a small device from his jacket pocket, and set it on the table. He pressed a single control. The chamber's central display shifted from the sensor map of the fleet to a different image, a close-in view of one of the unclassified vessels, clearly taken from a camera that had been positioned very close to the hull. The ship was dark gray. It had no external markings. Its surface was smooth in some sections and deeply textured in others, with recesses and integrated structures that clearly served multiple functions. It was not beautiful in the way that some warships were beautiful. It was not built for elegance. It was built the way everything humanity seemed to build, with a focus on function so pure and so complete that the result had its own kind of brutal coherence. Fast attack and insertion, Derek said. Rapid deployment. Independent operation. Long-range endurance without resupply. He paused. We call the class needles. Insertion into what? Gorith asked. Whatever needs to be entered, Derek said. A defended system. A fortified station. An enemy fleet formation. The Needle class is designed to get past things that are supposed to stop ships from getting past them. The chamber was very quiet. How many of that class are in your fleet today? The Myral delegate asked, in a voice that was trying very hard to be calm. 158, Derek said. Gorith set down his display. He looked at Lena. He looked at Derek. He looked at the image of the Needle-class ship still hovering above the center of the table. His species had fought more wars than any other in the Council. They had won most of them. They had a cultural relationship with conflict that ran all the way down to the bone, and because of that, they recognized things that smaller, less battle-hardened species sometimes missed. He recognized what he was looking at now. That is not a defensive fleet, he said. No, Lena agreed. It is not. A defensive fleet is built to hold ground. To protect systems. To deter. He gestured at the display. That fleet is built to go places and do things. It is an expeditionary force. Yes. Where has it been? Lena met his eyes. Everywhere we needed it to be. Another long silence. It was the kind of silence that had weight to it, the kind that pressed down on a room and made everyone in it understand that the conversation had reached a place that could not be walked back from. The kind of silence that made it clear that however the session ended, the relationship between humanity and the Galactic Council would not look the same afterward as it had looked before. Drax broke it, quietly, from his seat at the head of the table. Ambassador Marsh. When you said that the fleet outside is not your whole fleet, how much of your fleet did you bring today? Lena looked at him. About a third, she said. The Myral delegate made a sound that everyone in the room pretended not to hear. The question that broke the session open came from an unexpected place. The then Sora were a quiet species. They had been members of the Galactic Council for nearly 300 years and had, in that time, made perhaps 4 statements that anyone remembered. They were small, still, and deeply observant, and they had a reputation for asking questions that other species had been too distracted to think of. Their delegate, a being named Sewell, had sat motionless through the entire session. He had not reacted visibly to the fleet appearance. He had not reacted to the Needle-class reveal. He had simply watched Lena Marsh with 6 pale eyes and waited. Now he spoke. Ambassador. My delegation would like to understand something that has not been addressed. His translator rendered his voice as slow and unhurried. Every species that has developed significant military capacity in this council's history has done so for a reason. The Kethvoran expanded because they had enemies and then expanded further because they had developed a culture around expansion. The Suluan built their fleet because of the resource wars. There is always a reason. He tilted his small head. What is humanity's reason? The chamber was attentive in a way it had not been before. It was a good question, perhaps the best question of the session, and everyone in the room knew it. Lena did not answer immediately. She thought about it for a moment in a way that seemed genuine rather than calculated, as if the question deserved real consideration and she was giving it that. Fear, she said. Originally. Sewell waited. Humans are a very old species in terms of our evolutionary history, Lena continued. We developed on a planet that tried to kill us on a fairly regular basis. Ice ages. Famines. Disease. Predators. Other humans. We survived all of it, and the way we survived was not by becoming the strongest or the fastest or the hardest. We survived by being adaptable. By being clever. By looking at a threat and figuring out how to outlast it or outmaneuver it or destroy it. She paused. When we first became aware that there were other species out there, species with ships and weapons and resource extraction capabilities that dwarfed our own, we were afraid. That is the honest answer. We looked at what was out there and we were afraid. And so you built, Sewell said. And so we built, Lena agreed. But here is the part that I think is important for this council to understand. We did not build because a government ordered it. We did not build because a military doctrine demanded it. We built because humans, individually and collectively, decided that they did not want to be afraid. That is a very different thing. A government program can be cancelled. A military doctrine can be revised. A species-wide decision rooted in fear and pride and the absolute refusal to be helpless, she paused. That does not get cancelled. The room was silent. For 11 years, she continued, we watched this council operate. We watched how it handled disputes. We watched how the powerful species treated the less powerful ones. We watched what happened to species that came to this table without leverage. She looked around the room. We decided we would not come to this table until we had leverage. Gorith sat very still. You have been watching us. We have been watching everyone, Lena said, without apology. Derek, who had been standing behind her throughout the session, now moved to the side of the chamber's display controls and brought up a new image. It was a star map, not the council's standard chart, but a human-made one, with markings and designations in English that most of the delegates could not read. The map showed a significant portion of the galaxy, and it was covered in small markers. Every marker is a system where human vessels have operated in the last 11 years, Derek said. Observation, survey, resource assessment, and in some cases active presence. We have not filed any of this with the council because we were under no obligation to, and because frankly we did not trust that the information would be handled appropriately. He let the delegates look at the map for a moment. We are a thorough people. The map was stunning in its scope. The markers extended far beyond the 47 systems that humanity had officially colonized. They extended into deep territory, into regions that the Council had classified as uncharted or uninhabited, into the margins of Kethvoran space, near the edges of the Soluan Collective's outer claims, and into several corridors that were strategically significant in ways that any military analyst would recognize immediately. Gorith recognized them. His expression, which had been carefully controlled for most of the session, showed something now. Not quite alarm. Something adjacent to it. You have vessels in the Theran corridor, he said. We have vessels in many places, Derek said. The Theran corridor is a sensitive military zone. It borders. We are aware of what it borders, Derek said. We have been aware for about 7 years. He did not say it with aggression. He said it the same way he said everything, with a flat, steady calm that was somehow more unnerving than any raised voice would have been. Gorith looked at Lena. Lena looked back at him without expression. Ambassador, he said, and his voice was lower now, stripped of its usual authority. I need to ask you something directly. Not as a council matter. As one being to another. Go ahead, she said. Are you here to threaten us? Lena was quiet for a moment. The question had been asked honestly, and she respected that. Gorith was not a small being in any sense of the word, and asking the question in front of 42 delegations had cost him something. No, she said. We are not here to threaten anyone. We never came here looking for a fight. We never came here looking for conquest. If we had wanted to disrupt this council, we had options available to us that did not involve walking into your chamber and answering questions politely for 4 hours. She let that sit. We are here because you asked. And because we believe that a relationship between humanity and the rest of this galaxy is worth having, if it is built on honesty. And if it is not? Sewell asked, quietly. Lena looked at him. Then we will continue to be very good at being left alone, she said. We have had 11 years of practice. It was at that moment that a new alert came through on every display in the chamber. Not from the fleet. From the Council Station's own deep-range sensors, which had been running a second, more detailed sweep of the area around the human fleet since the recess. The sweep had found something. The alert was flagged maximum priority. The young Velshoran technician's voice came through the chamber speakers, slightly unsteady. Counselors. We are reading additional contacts beyond the fleet perimeter. Stationary contacts. Not broadcasting, not on any known transponder frequency. Our systems are classifying them as, there was a pause. We don't have a classification for them. They do not match any ship type in our database. The chamber turned, as one, to look at Lena. She had not looked at the displays. She already knew. Those, Derek said, are our second wave. They have been positioned there since before we arrived. They are unmanned, mostly, automated platforms with independent operation capability. They are not a threat. He paused, and in the pause there was something that might have been the ghost of a smile. They are a reminder. A reminder of what? Drax asked, from the head of the table. That when humanity comes somewhere, Derek said, it comes completely. The second wave discovery broke something loose in the chamber that had been holding since the session began. Not panic. The delegates of the Galactic Council were not, by and large, beings who panicked openly. But there was a quality that had been present in the room since the start, a kind of maintained collective fiction that the situation was still something the Council was managing, that the humans were still guests answering to a body with authority, and that fiction was now gone. Everyone in the room could feel its absence. The Kethvoran bloc whispered among themselves. The Soluan representatives conferred through their shared signal network, subtle flickering gestures that their species used when they did not want the content of their communication to be accessible to translators. The smaller delegation sat very still and tried to look as if they had not already decided that the correct course of action was to say as little as possible for the remainder of the session. Drax looked at all of them. Then he looked at Lena Marsh, sitting at the far end of the table with her leather folder in her calm hands, and he made a decision. He stood up. I would like to suggest, he said, in a voice that carried the full weight of his 2 centuries of council experience, that we dispense with the formal session structure. It is not serving anyone well. He looked around the table. No objections. Good. He walked around the table. This was unusual. Counselors did not walk around the table. The table was a boundary as much as a piece of furniture, and crossing it was a gesture with implications. Drax walked around it anyway and came to stand in the open space between the delegations and the human seats. He did not stand over Lena. He stood beside her, as if they were both looking at the room together. Ambassador Marsh, he said. I am going to speak plainly. I would appreciate that, Lena said. This council invited you here to review your expansion and, to be direct about it, to remind you that this body has authority in this part of the galaxy. We expected a smaller delegation, a degree of deference, and a process that we controlled. He paused. We were wrong on all 3 points. You are not here to be reminded of our authority. You are here to establish the nature of yours. Lena said nothing, which was its own kind of confirmation. I have been on this council for a very long time, Drax continued. I have seen species arrive at this table from positions of weakness and leave from positions of strength. I have seen the reverse. I have seen alliances form and collapse and reform over the course of centuries. And I have learned that when a new power enters a room at full strength and does not immediately use that strength, when it sits quietly and answers questions and waits, it is doing something that requires more discipline than almost anything else in politics. He looked at her. It is waiting for the other side to be ready to have the real conversation. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Counselor Drax. You are the most perceptive person in this room. I am the oldest person in this room, he said. Sometimes that amounts to the same thing. He turned and looked at the full council. We have all been asking the wrong question today. The question is not what humanity has built or how much of it there is or where it is positioned. Those are important facts, but they are not the question. The question is what humanity wants from a relationship with this council. That is the only question that matters now. He looked back at Lena. So I am asking it. Lena opened her leather folder for the first time in several hours. She took out a single document and set it on the table. It was not long, perhaps 3 pages, by the visible weight of it. She slid it toward the center of the room and left it there. Mutual recognition, she said. Humanity recognizes this council as the governing body for interspecies matters in the region. This council recognizes humanity as a sovereign power with full and equal standing, not as a developing species under review. She let that first point settle. We are not a developing species. We have not been one for some time. We would like that acknowledged in writing. Gorith stirred. Equal standing implies equal vote on council matters. It does, Lena agreed. The council does not grant equal standing to species that have not completed the standard review process. Your species has not completed. Our species has not begun the review process, Lena said, because the review process is designed to assess whether a species poses a threat to established council members. We believe the events of today have answered that question more completely than any formal review could. She paused. The answer is, only if provoked. Another silence. Gorith looked at the document on the table. He did not pick it up. Drax spoke again. What else? Access, Lena said. Human vessels will operate freely in council space with the same rights and protections extended to any member species. Our ships will not be stopped, boarded, or searched without our consent. We extend the same courtesy to council vessels in human space. She paused. We also extend something else. Protection. The word landed differently from everything else she had said. Protection was not a word that council members typically offered each other. It was the kind of word that implied an asymmetry, that one party had more to offer than the other. Explain, Drax said. There are things at the edges of this galaxy that this council has not dealt with yet, Lena said. Some of them because you have not found them. Some because you have found them and lack the means to address them. Human vessels have been operating in those regions for years. We have information. We have capability. We are willing to put both in service of the Council's security, as partners, not subordinates. She met Drax's eyes. We are not asking to lead. We are asking to stand beside. The room was very quiet. Derek had moved back to his place behind Lena, and he stood there with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the room with the same steady attention he had maintained since the session began. Sewell, who had not spoken since his question about humanity's reasons, raised one small hand. Ambassador. The things at the edges of the galaxy that you mentioned. Are they dangerous? Some of them are very dangerous, Lena said. Have human forces engaged them? Yes. And the outcomes? Lena looked at him steadily. We are still here, she said. They are not. It was, in its way, the single most significant statement of the entire session. Not because of the implied military capability, the Council had already absorbed hours of evidence on that subject, but because of what it meant about the 11 years of human silence. The quiet. The building. The careful, patient, thorough preparation that had looked, from the outside, like simple isolation. It had not been isolation. It had been focus. Humanity had not been hiding in its corner of the galaxy. It had been looking outward, finding the things that lurked in the dark between the stars, and dealing with them. Alone. Without telling anyone. Without asking for help or recognition or thanks. Drax sat down heavily in a nearby chair. He looked at the document still lying in the center of the room. He looked at the sensor display on the wall, which still showed the human fleet sitting motionless and patient at the edge of the Council's operational zone. He looked at Lena Marsh, who had come here with a leather folder and a kernel and changed the shape of galactic politics in an afternoon. Give us an hour, he said. Take 2, Lena said. We brought food. She reached under the table and produced a small container, from which she extracted what appeared to be a sandwich. She began eating it with the complete composure of a person who had done everything she came to do and was now simply waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. Gorith watched her eat. He had commanded fleets. He had negotiated the outcomes of wars. He had sat at this table through crises that had shaken the foundations of the Council. And in all of that time, across all of those confrontations, he had never once felt what he was feeling now, looking at a human woman eating a sandwich in the chamber of the Galactic Council with 460 warships parked outside. He felt, quite specifically, that the galaxy had become a different place today, and that humanity had been the one to change it, and that they had done it without raising their voice or firing a single shot. The document was signed 6 hours later. Every delegation voted in favor. Even Goritha's. Outside, the human fleet received a single short transmission from the advance shuttle. 12 words, in standard military brevity format, from Colonel Derek Vaughan. Mission complete. Stand down to standard hold. Tell the crew well done. The fleet held position for another hour, as ordered. Then, one by one, in the same quiet and unhurried way it had done everything else, it began to move. It did not leave. It simply shifted, spreading out, settling into the kind of loose long-term patrol posture that said, without any need for words, that it was not going far. It was staying. Because this was, now, Council space. And humanity was, now, part of the Council. And humanity took care of what was its.